Jesus gets to deliver his next few words.
Tetélestai, it is finished. When Jesus said it is finished, he wasn't saying, I'm glad that's over. What was finished was everything that Jesus did in his life and death to earn our salvation for us. This is what we call the atonement. In the first century, when an individual owed a debt, a certificate of debt would be made. And when that debt was settled, it would be declared with a single Greek word written on the parchment. Tetélestai. It meant completed, paid in full, finished, done. When Jesus hung on that cross, he was paying a certificate of debt. It was a sin debt, but it wasn't his sin debt, it was ours. Paul says in Colossians 2, and you who were dead in trespasses, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us, nailing it to the cross. Not only did Jesus live a sinless life in perfect obedience, fulfilling the law in our place, but then he voluntarily went to the cross as our substitute, suffering for our sin, bearing the wrath of God, and satisfying God's justice, so that by trusting in his perfect sacrifice, our relationship with God is restored. The prophet Isaiah foretold this 700 years before Christ. He was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and by his wounds we are healed. The Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. What is taking place in these moments on the cross is a divine transaction. Jesus takes our sin, and we receive his righteousness. Jesus takes our guilt, and we receive his goodness. Jesus takes our bruises, and we receive his blessings. So that when the Father looks at us, he no longer sees our sin, but rather the righteousness of his Son. 2 Corinthians 5 says, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. When we look at the cross, it reveals the wonder of Christ's sacrifice for us. Jesus didn't suffer a brutal, agonizing, torturous death on the cross because we're all just basically good people. Jesus died for desperate and depraved sinners. The seriousness of our sin required the sacrifice of God himself to rectify. And when we begin to really understand this, the wonder of what Jesus did for us becomes that much more amazing. When we look at the cross, it testifies to the incredible depth of God's love. Paul says, for the wages of sin is death. God would have been completely justified leaving us in our sin and misery. But because of his great love, he rescued us. He chose to redeem and save us, not because of anything good in us, but out of the richness of his love and mercy. When we look at the cross, it reminds us of why salvation must be by grace through faith. There is nothing you or I can do to earn our salvation. Jesus did it all. It is finished, done, completed, paid in full. Tetélestai. Jesus purchased our salvation at the cost of his own life. He did for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And this is why Jesus is the only way of salvation. Jesus is the only way because only Jesus took care of the sin debt. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. Tetélestai, it is finished. Jesus said this as he hung on the cross for us.